Picture this: a cold February night in 1692, deep in the heart of colonial Massachusetts. The wind howls through the bare trees of Salem Village, rattling the wooden shutters of tiny houses lit by flickering candles. Inside one of them, two young girls twist and convulse, their eyes wide with terror as they scream of invisible tormentors clawing at their skin. Neighbors whisper of witchcraft, ministers call for prayer, and before dawn, fear will spread like wildfire through an entire community. In the late 17th century, Salem Village was a small Puritan settlement trying to survive on the harsh edges of the New World. Life was ruled by faith, fear, and a fragile sense of order. The Puritans believed the devil was not just a symbol of evil, but a living presence stalking their fields, their homes, their very souls. In a world where misfortune meant divine punishment and illness hinted at sin, suspicion was an everyday companion. The winter of 1692 brought more than cold. It brought hysteria. When young Betty Paris and Abigail Williams, the daughter and niece of the local minister, began suffering strange fits and visions, no one could explain their behavior. The physicians found no illness, so the only answer, in their eyes, was the supernatural. Whispers became accusations, and accusations turned into deadly trials. Before it was over, more than 200 people would be accused of witchcraft, 19 hanged, and one crushed to death under stones. But beneath the frenzy lay deeper forces: jealousy, fear, and a desperate need for control. Forces that would haunt America's conscience for centuries to come. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy dark history stories like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your feedback in the comments. It helps us uncover more of the haunting truths hidden in the past. The story of Salem begins not with witches, but with fear, the kind that festers quietly in the heart of a community already stretched to its breaking point. In 1692, Salem Village was a place divided. Families quarreled over land boundaries, church authority, and taxes. Old feuds ran deep, and the villagers were bound by rigid religious beliefs that left no room for doubt or dissent. Every hardship, every illness, every failed crop was seen as the devil's work. And into this cauldron of tension stepped two young girls, Betty Paris, just 9 years old, and her 11-year-old cousin, Abigail Williams. They lived in the home of Reverend Samuel Paris, a stern and unpopular minister whose fiery sermons spoke often of sin and damnation. It began quietly, a few strange spasms, odd mutterings, and complaints of being pricked by unseen pins. But within weeks, the girls' fits grew worse. They screamed, contorted, and claimed to see spectral figures tormenting them. The village physician, unable to diagnose any physical cause, declared the girls under an evil hand. And that phrase, simple, fearful, final, was the spark that set the village ablaze. Imagine being there, a dark meeting house filled with anxious faces, candles flickering against wooden walls, the sound of whispered prayers mingling with the cries of the afflicted. The Puritans believed absolutely in the invisible world, angels, demons, and the constant battle for the soul of mankind. So when the girls named their tormentors, the accusations were taken as divine truth. The first names shocked everyone. Tituba, the family's enslaved woman from Barbados; Sarah Good, a destitute beggar; and Sarah Osborne, a woman who rarely attended church. These were outsiders, easy targets in a community obsessed with purity and order. Under interrogation, Tituba confessed. But her confession was not one of guilt alone. She told vivid stories of black dogs, strange books, and spectral creatures, describing how the devil came to Salem to claim its people. Whether she spoke to save herself or under duress, her words unleashed something far more dangerous than any curse. Within days, others began to claim they too had seen witches. The afflicted girls grew in number, their performances more dramatic. They shrieked, convulsed, and pointed accusing fingers at neighbors, teachers, and even respected church members. Panic spread faster than reason could catch it. Ministers preached of Satan's army, while magistrates gathered to question the accused. The community began to divide, those who believed the devil was loose among them, and those who dared to question the truth of the girls' visions. But questioning itself became a risk. To doubt the existence of witches was to side with them. Suspicion became survival. Trials were held in makeshift courts, where spectral evidence, visions, dreams, and invisible forces was accepted as proof. Imagine standing before a room full of your neighbors as a child screams your name, claiming your spirit appeared to them in the night. No witnesses, no defense, no escape. Many confessed to crimes they never committed, hoping confession would spare their lives. Some refused, believing that even a lie would damn their souls. Those were the ones who hanged. Gallows Hill became a place of horror, a grim reminder of how faith could twist into fear. By summer, the accusations had grown wild and unstoppable. Even respected figures like Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old woman known for her kindness, were condemned. Her trial drew gasps when the afflicted girls mimicked her every word and motion, claiming she was using witchcraft to control them. Despite widespread doubt, she was convicted and hanged. The crowd that once believed in righteousness now watched in uneasy silence as friends and neighbors were led to their deaths. Every execution made it harder to stop. Every accusation fed the hunger for more. The judges, driven by duty and pride, refused to admit they might be wrong. The villagers, too afraid to speak, allowed the madness to consume them. But here's the chilling part. The afflicted weren't always lying. Modern experts suggest that many of the symptoms could have been caused by ergot poisoning, a fungus found in rye that produces hallucinations and convulsions similar to LSD. Others point to psychological explanations. Mass hysteria born from fear, isolation, and repression. Imagine a world where every strange sound in the night, every misfortune, every pain could be blamed on unseen evil. In that world, the line between victim and accuser vanished. Salem became a stage where belief itself turned deadly, and yet the most haunting truth lies in how ordinary the people were. These weren't monsters or villains. They were farmers, mothers, ministers, and children. They believed they were doing God's work. When the afflicted girls screamed, the villagers saw not deceit, but evidence of a spiritual war. The terror was real to them. That's what makes the story so dark. Not the superstition, but the sincerity. Imagine the fear of waking each morning wondering if today it would be your name whispered in the meeting house, your door that the constable would knock upon. In Salem, innocence offered no protection. The devil's mark could appear on anyone, anywhere, at any time. By autumn, the flames of hysteria were rising, and the noose had become the village's answer to fear. But the real horror was only beginning, because soon Salem would turn its gaze inward and start devouring itself. As the summer of 1692 deepened, the village of Salem transformed into a place where every breath carried suspicion, and every glance might betray a curse. Fear had taken hold so completely that even the innocent began to wonder if the devil truly walked among them. The meeting house, once a place of worship, became a courtroom filled with dread. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of desperate families, their faces pale in the dim candlelight. The accused stood trembling, surrounded by neighbors they had once trusted. Every whisper sounded like an accusation. Every silence felt like guilt. The trials had become theater, a performance of terror where the afflicted girls were the stars and the condemned the unwilling cast. The girls screamed, fell into fits, and pointed trembling fingers as judges nodded grimly. "She sends her specter upon me," they would cry. their eyes rolling back in rehearsed agony. And just like that, another life would be ruined. The court of Oyer and Terminer, created by Governor William Phipps, was meant to bring justice, but justice in Salem had twisted into something cruel and blind. Presided over by judges like Samuel Sewall and William Stoughton, the trials relied heavily on spectral evidence, unseen forces only the afflicted could perceive. There was no defense against it. How could one disprove a vision? How could anyone prove they were not in league with the devil? The accused were forced into impossible choices. They could confess and name others, feeding the fire, or deny the charge and face the gallows. Either path led to destruction. The clergy, too, played their part. Reverend Cotton Mather, a respected theologian, warned against accepting spectral evidence. Yet his writings about invisible worlds and witchcraft had helped sow the very fear now devouring Salem. His father, Increase Mather, would later condemn the trials, but for many, his words came too late. Imagine the air thick with the smell of sweat and fear, the cries of families begging for mercy as the constables dragged their loved ones away. The jail cells overflowed, cold, damp, and dark. They were pits of misery, where prisoners were chained to walls, their feet swollen, their bodies starved. Mothers were separated from children, husbands from wives. Some died waiting for trial, their names forgotten even before the rope could find them. And still, the accusations came, not just from the girls now, but from neighbors settling grudges, from those who saw an opportunity to seize land or avenge an insult. It became a contagion of cruelty. The more people died, the more Salem justified its bloodlust by calling it divine justice. But here's what's most haunting. It wasn't just Salem Village anymore. The hysteria had spread beyond its borders to neighboring towns like Andover, Ipswich, and Topsfield. Entire families were accused. Even children were interrogated, their frightened words used to condemn adults. In Andover, a mother and her daughter were both accused after a strange illness swept through their home. The little girl, terrified and confused, confessed that her mother had bewitched her. Within weeks, she too was hanged. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a growing storm of paranoia that no one could control. Among the condemned was John Proctor, a farmer known for his honesty and temper. He had spoken out early against the trials, calling the girls frauds and the court corrupt. For that, he became one of its victims. During his trial, the afflicted collapsed at his feet, screaming that his spirit was attacking them. His words of defense meant nothing. When he was led to the gallows, he refused to confess, saying only, "God forbid I should take a lie upon my soul." He died with his integrity intact, though his death would later haunt the conscience of those who watched him hang. And then there was Giles Corey, an old man of 80, stubborn and defiant. When accused of witchcraft, he refused to enter a plea. Under English law, that meant he could not be tried, but it also meant he could not be executed legally without one. To force him to confess, the court ordered him pressed under heavy stones. For 2 agonizing days, he lay in the dirt, his chest crushed by the growing weight, refusing to yield. His final words, as legend tells, were simple and defiant. "More weight." He died, but his silence condemned the court far louder than any words could have. These deaths marked the peak of Salem's madness. By September, the village was exhausted. The jails were full. Crops were rotting in the fields, and whispers began to spread that perhaps the devil's greatest trick was not possessing the accused, but deceiving the accusers. When Governor Phipps's own wife was named as a witch, he finally suspended the court. The trials ended abruptly, leaving behind a trail of grief and guilt that no one could erase. In total, 19 people were hanged, 1 was pressed to death, and more than 100 others suffered imprisonment. Some infants died in their mother's arms behind bars. The witch hunt that had begun with two frightened girls now stood revealed as one of the darkest chapters in early American history. But the end of the trials didn't bring peace. It brought silence, and silence can be its own kind of haunting. Years later, many of the judges and jurors would express deep remorse. Samuel Sewall publicly confessed his guilt, standing before his congregation as tears rolled down his face. He asked for God's forgiveness and for the forgiveness of the families he had wronged. Reverend Parris, whose sermons had once inflamed the panic, was eventually forced to leave Salem. Even the afflicted girls, now older and aware of what they had done, carried their guilt for the rest of their lives. Ann Putnam, Jr., one of the first accusers, offered a written apology decades later, saying she had been deluded by Satan. But can words ever undo death? Modern historians have studied Salem endlessly, searching for answers, for reasons that make sense of the madness. Some see it as a clash of old feuds disguised as piety. Others view it as a reflection of the human mind under pressure, where isolation and fear warp reality. Psychologists compare it to modern cases of mass hysteria, events where entire communities convince themselves of something unreal because fear makes it feel true. We've seen echoes of it in history. During the Red Scare of the 1950s, when Americans accused one another of communism with little proof, or in online witch hunts today, where public outrage can destroy reputations overnight. The tools have changed, but the impulse remains the same: to seek out evil, even if it means inventing it. Imagine standing in that same village today, quiet and green, tourists wandering past old gravestones. It's hard to picture the horror that once lived here. The wind that blows through the trees seems to carry whispers, not of witches, but of regret. Salem became a symbol, a warning of what happens when fear overtakes reason. The people who lived it were not monsters, but ordinary souls who believed they were fighting darkness. And in trying to destroy that darkness, they became its instruments. But the story isn't over yet. Because after the ashes settled and the gallows grew silent, Salem would face a final reckoning, not with demons or witches, but with its own conscience. By the winter of 1693, Salem village was a shell of what it had been. The fields lay barren, the livestock thin, the once proud congregation fractured beyond repair. Families avoided each other in the narrow dirt lanes. The gallows stood empty now, but its shadow lingered across the frozen ground like a scar that would never fade. There was no joy in the acquittals that came later, only shame. Those who had survived were broken, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Some could no longer pray. Others refused to attend church, unable to sit beside those who had accused their loved ones. The trials had ended, but the fear hadn't vanished. It had simply gone quiet, settling deep into the soil of Salem, where it would lie buried for generations. The authorities, realizing the enormity of what they had done, tried to repair the damage. Governor Phipps dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer, replaced it with a new tribunal that disallowed spectral evidence, and freed those still awaiting trial. But it was too late for those who had already been executed. Their bodies hung over the village's conscience like ghosts. In 1697, a day of fasting and prayer was declared, a public admission of guilt, a plea for forgiveness. People gathered in silence, some weeping, others unable to look each other in the eye. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges who had condemned the accused, stood before his congregation in Boston and confessed his sin. With trembling hands, he read his statement aloud, acknowledging the injustice of the trials. The minister prayed over him, and the church bowed their heads. But forgiveness did not come easily. For some, it never came at all. As years passed, the people of Salem tried to move on. The village changed names, merged with surrounding communities, and became known as Danvers. But even with the name erased, the memory endured. The descendants of the accused carried the burden of shame. while the descendants of the accusers carried the burden of guilt. Generations later, the trials would become a story told to children, a warning whispered at bedtime about the dangers of false belief and mob fear. Yet, for those who lived through it, the wounds never fully healed. Imagine being the child of a woman hanged for witchcraft, growing up in the same village that condemned her. How do you pray in the same church? How do you forgive the people who watched your mother die? That was the legacy of Salem, not just death, but the slow decay of trust that followed. In the centuries that followed, scholars and writers would return to Salem again and again, trying to understand how a God-fearing community could turn so violently on itself. Some said it was psychological, a mass hysteria triggered by fear and superstition. Others pointed to ergot poisoning from contaminated rye bread, which can cause hallucinations and convulsions. But no single theory could capture the full horror of what happened. The truth is far more complex. Salem wasn't just about witches. It was about human nature. It was about power, fear, and belief. Forces that, when combined, can destroy even the strongest societies. The trials became a mirror reflecting our capacity for cruelty, even in the name of righteousness. But here's the chilling part. Even as time moved forward, the spirit of Salem never truly died. It echoed through history, reappearing in new forms. During the McCarthy era of the 1950s, American politics fell under a similar spell. Senator Joseph McCarthy's accusations of communist infiltration mirrored the hysteria of 1692. People lost jobs, reputations, and even lives based on suspicion and fear. Arthur Miller captured this parallel in his play The Crucible, using the Salem witch trials as an allegory for modern persecution. His words reminded the world that Salem wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. A reminder that hysteria and moral panic are not relics of the past, but ever-present dangers in times of fear. Today, visitors come to Salem seeking history, curiosity, and a touch of the macabre. The cobblestone streets are lined with museums, old houses, and plaques marking where the accused once lived or died. Halloween turns the town into a festival of witches and ghosts, as if embracing the darkness has become a way to heal from it. But behind the costumes and souvenirs lies a deeper truth. This was once a place of suffering. The gallows may be gone, but the earth remembers. At the site now known as Proctor's Ledge, where the hangings took place, memorial stones bear the names of the dead. Tourists read them quietly, perhaps feeling the weight of history pressing down through the centuries. And if you listen closely on a windy day, the rustling leaves almost sound like whispers, not curses, but confessions. Experts continue to study the psychology of Salem because it offers lessons we still need today. The trials reveal how quickly fear can replace reason, how gossip can turn into evidence, and how collective paranoia can dismantle entire communities. We see echoes of Salem in online outrage, where rumors spread faster than truth and reputations are destroyed overnight. The platforms may have changed, but the pattern is the same. Fear, accusation, and the comfort of blaming someone else for what we cannot control. Salem shows us that evil doesn't always wear horns. Sometimes it wears the face of a frightened neighbor or a righteous crowd. Imagine standing before one of those old stone memorials at dusk. The air is still, the sun sinking beyond the trees, casting long shadows over the names carved in granite. Bridget Bishop, Rebecca Nurse, John Proctor, Mary Easty, Giles Corey. Each name represents a story, a life, a family, a tragedy. Each one was a person who believed in God, worked the land, and loved their children. And yet, in the grip of hysteria, their neighbors saw devils instead of friends. The haunting part is that their stories are not unique. They've been repeated throughout history, in different forms, under different names, wherever fear and ignorance find fertile ground. When we talk about Salem today, It's tempting to treat it as distant folklore, a cautionary tale from another age. But look closer, and you'll see its reflection in modern life. In times of crisis, we still seek someone to blame. We still let fear guide us. We still burn reputations instead of bodies. Salem reminds us that civilization is fragile, and reason is its thin thread. Once that thread breaks, the darkness waiting beneath is always ready to return. And so, the dark history of Salem Village remains not just a story of demons or mass hysteria, but of humanity itself. Because in the end, the witches were never real. The fear was. The evil wasn't in the devil's hand, but in the trembling fingers of those who pointed. The question that haunted Salem then still echoes now. When fear takes over, who among us can truly claim to be innocent? Centuries have passed since the last noose swung over Salem, yet the lesson it left behind is as chilling as ever. Fear, once unleashed, becomes a beast that cannot be reasoned with. The villagers believed they were purging evil, but in truth, they were consumed by it. Their story reminds us that the real danger lies not in the supernatural, but in our willingness to surrender logic to panic. Salem's ghosts don't haunt its streets. They haunt our instincts, waiting for the next time we let fear decide justice. When we look back on the witch trials, it's easy to pity those who died. But the real tragedy lies in those who lived, carrying the unbearable weight of guilt, shame, and silence. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, like the video, and tell us in the comments what type of stories you'd like to see. Because history's darkest chapters still have voices, and through stories like this, we can make sure they're never forgotten.